Hi everyone, we're going to continue our discussion of freshwater ecosystems here. So we know that freshwater ecosystems are going to include ponds, lakes, streams, rivers, and wetlands. We've talked about the wetlands a little bit, so we're going to move on to the other different types of freshwater ecosystems here. So some characteristics of these aquatic ecosystems. So some factors that we're going to discuss are temperature, sunlight, oxygen, and nutrients. And those are going to determine which organisms are going to live in which area of the water that we talk about here. So plankton is a type of organism that we're going to see. So plankton are the mass, mostly microscopic organisms that float or drift freely in our water. So microscopic animals like zooplankton or microscopic plants are going to be called photoplankton. So plankton is just that abundancy that we're going to see in our water. So for animals, we're going to see zooplankton, and for plants or algae, we're going to see that photoplankton. So these are just the mass. Usually these are the organisms that are going to be eaten most frequently in our aquatic ecosystems. Our nekton are organisms that swim actively in open water and are independent of currents, so they can actually move, not just dependent on the current of the water, so they can swim against the current. Benthos are bottom-dwelling organisms of sea, ocean, and are often attached to hard surfaces. And then decomposers are also part of our aquatic organisms. And again, we can have many different types of decomposers that we see. So if we take a look at our lakes, ponds, and wetlands can form naturally where groundwater is reaching Earth's surface. So humans intentionally create artificial lakes, and those are usually created by damming, flowing rivers, and using that power for irrigation, water storage, and recreation. So our naturally formed lakes, ponds, and wetlands create that groundwater reaching to the surface, where artificial lakes are caused by damming of those rivers or streams that are going to occur there. So lakes and ponds are structured into horizontal and vertical zones. Those are the ones that we talked about just a little bit earlier. And these types of organisms that are going to be present are dependent on the amount of sunlight that's going to be available in these lakes and ponds here. So if we take a look at our life in our lake, we remember our littoral zone is that zone of shallow fresh water where we can see both the land and the sea. Light reaches the bottom, and it's going to nurture the plants. And in this littoral zone, we're going to see very diverse and abundant life that lives here. Open water, plants, algae, and bacteria capture the solar energy to make their own food during photosynthesis. So this is all occurring in that littoral zone. Some bodies of fresh water are so deep that there's little light for photosynthesis. And that's where we're going to see our bacteria living in those deep areas of that fresh water. We're also going to see fish who are adapted to cooler, darker water are going to live there as well. Eventually, those dead and decaying organisms are going to reach that benthic zone, which we defined as that bottom, the ground part of the water, or lake, river, whatever it is. So again, our benthic zone is a region near the bottom of the pond, lake, or ocean that is inhabited by those decomposers, insect larvae, and clams. So that would be a good definition for our benthic zone here. So how nutrients affect lakes, this is going to be a big part. So erodification is an increase in the amount of nutrients, such as nitrates, that we can see in an aquatic ecosystem here. So the amount of plants and algae that grow, and the number of bacteria that are feeding on these decaying organisms grow as well. So all of that is going to be dependent on those nutrients that we can find in those lakes or any aquatic ecosystem. So if we go on to rivers and streams, we're going to see that rivers and streams are bodies and surfaces that surface the water that flow downhill. So this is an important part. And these rivers and streams are eventually going to reach some sort of ocean or inland sea. It's really important to note that these downhill flow. There's actually only one river that flows in the opposite direction, and that's going to be our Tigris River in Egypt. Another important term here is watershed. This is the area of land drained by rivers and its turbidities. And some characteristics that we're going to see within our rivers and streams. We're going to see a lot of different dissolved oxygen. Temperatures are going to vary just a little bit. We're going to characterize these by water speed, organisms, and other things, and its change of source to the mouth of that river. So those are some characteristics that we're going to see when we try to define rivers versus streams. So when we talk about rivers a little bit, we're going to see it's the headwaters. Rivers usually are cold and full of oxygen. They're also going to be running swiftly, so a really fast movement here to a shallow, through that shallow riverbed. So as our river flows down a mountain, it can broaden, become warmer, wider, and slower, and decrease in that oxygen. So we can see rivers are ever changing as well. So when they broaden, we can see warmer temperatures. They're going to move slower and decrease in that oxygen amount. So the river is going to change with the land and the climate in which it flows through. So depending on where we're going to see these rivers, we're going to see a very big variation between those characteristics that we talked about. So that is where we're going to stop for today. If you have any questions on any of these freshwater ecosystems, make sure you reach out and ask.